In my 25 years of growing tomatoes, I have grown them in heavy clay that held water like a bathtub, in raised beds, in containers on a concrete patio, and in backyard plots with soil so depleted it could barely support a weed. And in all of that time, across all of those seasons, I have watched the same thing happen over and over with a consistency that is almost painful to observe. Careful, dedicated people. People who read the seed catalogs, who amended their soil, who watered faithfully, who staked and pruned and fertilized and did everything they believed they were supposed to do, went out to their garden one morning and found plants that were yellowing from the bottom up, fruit that was cracked open or blackened at the tip, stems that had collapsed without explanation, and a harvest that was a fraction of what it should have been. And every single time, those gardeners blamed themselves. They decided they were not good enough at this, that their soil was wrong, or their climate was wrong, or they simply did not have what it takes. They went back to the garden center, bought more plants, more fertilizer, more spray, and started the whole cycle over again. I want to stop that cycle today. What I am going to give you in this video are the 5 most damaging mistakes you can make when growing tomatoes. Not vague cautions. Not general warnings, the actual science of what goes wrong inside the plant, the specific variety names, the zones, and the concrete fixes that change the outcome. And one of these mistakes, the one I am going to walk you through at number 4, is something that most gardeners never identify correctly even after it has destroyed their entire crop. They misdiagnose it every time. We are going to fix that today. Before we go any further, I need you to drop your U.S. state or your USDA hardiness zone in the comments right now. Just your state, just your zone. That information tells me exactly where this community is growing, and it helps me build content that is genuinely specific to your conditions and your climate, not advice written for a hypothetical average garden that does not actually exist anywhere. Drop that in the comments right now, and then let us get into this. Mistake number 1, burying your transplant wrong or planting at the wrong time. This sounds like a beginner mistake, and it is. But I say that without condescension because the information most people receive about transplanting tomatoes is incomplete in ways that matter enormously. Let me start with what most people do know. Tomatoes can be buried deep. Unlike most plants where burying the stem is a death sentence, tomatoes are unique in their ability to develop roots all along any portion of stem that is buried underground. If you take a leggy transplant that has 6 inches of bare stem below the lowest leaves, you can bury that stem entirely, either straight down or in a shallow trench laid at an angle, and within 2 weeks that buried stem will have produced a dense network of new feeder roots along its entire length. That larger root system gives the plant more surface area to pull water and nutrients from the soil. It anchors the plant more securely against wind, and it gives the developing tomato a physiological head start that a shallowly planted transplant simply cannot match. Pinch off any leaves that would end up below the soil line before you plant. Those leaves will rot underground and create a pathway for soil-borne pathogens directly into the buried stem. Plant deep, plant clean, and the root system the plant builds in the first 2 weeks will pay dividends all season. But here's the part that is almost never discussed. The timing of that transplant matters as much as the depth, and the mistake gardeners make consistently is going by the calendar instead of the soil. Most seed packets and most garden center staff will give you a transplant date based on your last frost. Zone 6, last frost around April 15th, transplant after that. And that guidance is not wrong exactly, but it is dangerously incomplete, because a tomato transplant put into cold soil, even soil that is technically above freezing, does not just sit there waiting to grow, it suffers. Tomato roots become essentially inactive below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The metabolic processes that drive nutrient absorptions and water uptake slow to a near standstill in cold soil. A transplant put into 50-degree soil in late April will sit there looking vaguely alive but making no real progress, while the soil slowly warms. And during that stalled period, the plant is vulnerable. Its immune response is suppressed. Soil-borne pathogens can get a foothold in the stressed root zone before the plant has the metabolic energy to resist them. And the transplant shock compounds the problem. The plant was already stressed by being moved. Cold soil extends that stress window dramatically. I have seen transplants put into warm soil 2 weeks later than their neighbors catch up and surpass those earlier planted neighbors by the end of June. Because a tomato that went into 65-degree soil and immediately began establishing roots grew more in its first 3 weeks than a plant that spent those same 3 weeks sitting cold and stressed. Get a cheap soil thermometer. They cost under $10 at any garden center. Push it into the soil at root depth, about 4 inches down, in the morning before the day has had a chance to warm the surface. If the reading is below 60 degrees, wait. If it is at 60 or above and staying there consistently, plant. That single habit will improve your transplant success rate more than almost any other single change you can make. For variety timing, early maturing varieties are specifically bred for gardeners in short season climates where the soil and air both warm late. Select zones 4 through 9, which sets fruit in cool conditions that cause blossom drop in most other varieties, is exceptional for the Pacific Northwest and Upper Midwest. Stupus zones 3 through 9, a Czech heirloom that produces consistently in cold, short seasons, is one of the most reliable early tomatoes in existence. Legend zones 4 through 9, developed by Oregon State University specifically for cool, wet conditions, has outstanding disease resistance and produces large fruit despite a short season. For gardeners in zones 7 through 10, where the problem is not cold but rather brutal summer heat that causes blossom drop when temperatures exceed 95 degrees, heat-tolerant varieties like Solar Fire zones 7 through 11 and Heatmaster zones 6 through 11 are specifically bred to set fruit through temperatures that shut down pollen viability in standard varieties. Mistake number 2, overhead watering and inconsistent moisture. Let me tell you what actually happens inside a tomato fruit during a drought and flood watering cycle, because once you understand the biology, you will never look at a cracked tomato the same way again. Tomato fruit is built from millions of individual cells that are packed with water and expanding steadily from pollination to harvest. When soil moisture is consistent, those cells enlarge at a controlled rate, and the skin of the fruit stretches gradually to accommodate that growth. But when you allow the soil to go bone dry for several days and then deliver a heavy watering or a hard rain, those cells go from water-starved to suddenly flooded. They expand rapidly, far faster than the skin can accommodate, and the skin splits. That is a cracked tomato. It is not a disease. It is not a nutrient deficiency. It is pure physics, and it is almost entirely preventable. But cracking, as frustrating as it is actually the easier problem to explain. The one that genuinely confuses most gardeners is blossom end rot. And I want to spend real time on this because the amount of money spent every summer on calcium sprays and calcium additives that do absolutely nothing to fix this problem is significant, and it comes directly from a misunderstanding of what blossom end rot actually is. Blossom end rot is a calcium deficiency inside the developing fruit, not a calcium deficiency in your soil. In most American garden soils, calcium is present in perfectly adequate amounts. It is a deficiency caused by the plant's inability to move calcium from the roots up to the rapidly developing cells at the tip of the fruit fast enough to keep up with that development. And calcium transport inside a tomato plant is almost entirely driven by a consistent, steady flow of water moving up through the plant's vascular system. When you allow the soil to swing between dry and saturated, that flow becomes erratic. The calcium is sitting in your soil. The plant simply cannot pull it up and deliver it reliably when moisture availability is lurching back and forth. So the cells at the blossom end, the tip of the fruit farthest from the stem, die and collapse before they ever finish developing. And that is the dark, sunken, leathery patch you see when you pick up what looked like a healthy tomato from above. Here is the part that costs people real money. You can buy calcium sprays, you can add calcium to your fertilizer, you can lime your soil. And if you are still watering inconsistently, every dollar of that spending is wasted. The problem is not how much calcium is in your garden. The problem is whether a steady supply of water is moving through the plant, carrying that calcium to where it needs to go. Fix the watering and you fix the blossom end rot. The calcium was already there. Water deeply and consistently. Aim for 1 to 2 inches per week from rainfall or from you. Do not skim the surface with a quick pass of the hose. Water slowly so that moisture penetrates 8 to 12 inches down into the root zone where it actually does something. Lay 2 to 4 inches of mulch, straw, shredded leaves, or wood chips around the base of every plant. Mulch is not decorative. It is a moisture buffer that slows evaporation after watering, reduces the temperature swings in the top layer of soil, and dramatically reduces the boom and bust moisture cycles that crack fruit and starve developing cells of calcium transport. Apply it generously and keep it a few inches back from the base of the stem to prevent crown rot. The second half of this mistake is the overhead watering habit. Standing over your tomato plants with a hose or running a sprinkler that wets the foliage is one of the most consistently harmful things you can do to a tomato garden. Every drop of water that lands on a tomato leaf is a potential disease event. Wet foliage in warm weather is precisely the environment that fungal spores need to germinate and spread. Early blight, which shows up as dark concentric lesions on the lower leaves. Septoria leaf spot, which produces small pale spots with darker borders. Gray mold, which does exactly what the name suggests. These are among the most destructive tomato diseases in American home gardens, and every one of them is dramatically accelerated by wet foliage. There is also a splash mechanism at work that most people never consider. Water hitting soil surface kicks up tiny droplets of soil that carry soil-borne pathogen spores with them and deposit those spores directly onto your lowest leaves. That is one of the primary infection pathways for early blight specifically. The spores live in the soil, the water carries them up, and the wet leaf surface gives them exactly what they need to take hold. Water at the base of every plant, always. A drip irrigation system is ideal because it delivers moisture directly to the root zone and keeps foliage completely dry all season. But even watering by hand, put the nozzle at soil level and water the ground, not the plant. Water in the morning so that any incidental moisture on foliage has the warmth of the day to evaporate before the cooler, more humid evening hours settle in. Wet foliage sitting through a warm night is a fungal infection waiting to happen. Varieties with the most built-in resilience to moisture fluctuation include Celebrity Zones 3 through 9, which was specifically bred for crack resistance and broad disease tolerance, and is one of the most dependable main-season tomatoes available to home gardeners. Mountain Merit Zones 5 through 9, developed by North Carolina State University, has outstanding resistance to the most common foliar diseases and performs well under variable moisture conditions. For cherry types, Juliet Zones 3 through 10 is a crack-resistant elongated cherry that holds on the vine without splitting far longer than round cherry varieties, which matters enormously when you are working with unpredictable summer rainfall. Mistake number 3, getting the fertilizer program backwards. I want you to picture something specific. It is late June. Your tomato plants are extraordinary looking, tall, dense, a deep saturated green that is darker and richer than you have ever seen on a tomato plant. The leaves are broad, the stems are thick, the whole plant radiates vigor, and you feel like you did everything right. You have been fertilizing consistently with a high nitrogen product, and the visual results look like success. Then July arrives. The plants keep pushing upward, keep generating new foliage, keep branching, but the flowers that appear drop off without setting fruit, or they set tiny fruit that stalls and never sizes up. Week after week, these magnificent plants just sit there growing bigger and producing almost nothing you can eat. This is what happens when nitrogen dominates your fertilizer program through the fruiting phase, and it is one of the most common and most preventable harvest failures in home tomato gardening. Let me explain the biology because this will change how you fertilize every tomato you grow from this point forward. Nitrogen is the element that drives vegetative growth, stems, leaves, overall plant structure. Tomatoes do need nitrogen, particularly early in their development when they are building the structural framework that will eventually carry a heavy fruit load. But nitrogen is not the element that triggers flowering and fruit development. That job belongs primarily to phosphorus, which stimulates root development and the formation of flower buds, and to potassium, which regulates the processes involved in fruit development, sugar accumulation, and cell wall integrity. When you continue pushing nitrogen through the season without shifting to a phosphorus and potassium forward formula as the plant enters its flowering phase, you are telling the plant to keep building infrastructure when it should be producing a harvest. The plant responds to what it is given. Given excess nitrogen, it uses it to grow more leaves, more stem, more branches. The reproductive process, the flowers, the fruit gets deprioritized, and you end up with a beautiful green plant and an empty kitchen. But there is a second consequence of nitrogen overfeeding that most gardeners never connect to the problem, because it circles back to something we discussed earlier, blossom end rot. Specifically, the ammonium form of nitrogen, which is common in many synthetic fertilizers, actively competes with calcium ions for uptake at the root surface. When ammonium is present in high concentrations in the soil, it crowds out calcium. The plant absorbs less calcium even when adequate calcium is sitting right there in the soil, and the developing fruit at the blossom end suffers the deficiency we already described. So you can have perfect watering, you can have perfect soil calcium levels, and you can still trigger blossom end rot simply by overfeeding with a nitrogen-heavy fertilizer at the wrong point in the plant's development. Nobody at the garden center connects those dots for you. They sell you the fertilizer, and then they sell you the calcium spray to fix the problem the fertilizer caused. Here's what you should actually do. In the first few weeks after transplanting, use a balanced fertilizer in the range of 10-10-10 or 8-8-8 to support establishment and early growth. Once your plants begin showing their first flower clusters, which on most varieties happens when the plant reaches roughly 12 to 18 inches tall, shift your formula, move to something higher in phosphorus and potassium and lower in nitrogen. A product like Espoma Tomato Tone 346 or Job's Organics Tomato and Vegetable 253 is appropriate at this stage. These formulas support the transition from vegetative growth to fruiting without the nitrogen spike that derails it. Apply lightly every 2 to 3 weeks rather than heavily once a month. You want a steady, supportive nutritional environment, not periodic jolts that overwhelm the plant's uptake capacity. The varieties most susceptible to nitrogen-induced imbalance are the large-fruited, indeterminate heirlooms. Brandywine Zones 5 through 8, Cherokee Purple Zones 5 through 8, and German Johnson Zones 5 through 9 are extraordinary tomatoes, but they want to grow, and if you feed them the wrong thing at the wrong time, they will put every ounce of that energy into foliage and give you almost nothing worth harvesting. Watch your formula shift carefully as those plants enter the flowering stage. I want to stop here for just a moment because I want to ask you something directly. Think about the last 3 growing seasons. Add up honestly what you spent on transplants, fertilizers, sprays, replacement plants when the first ones failed. For most American gardeners who take their vegetable garden seriously, that number over 3 years is $200, $300, $500 or more, and a meaningful portion of that money was spent replacing tomatoes that died from problems that had completely preventable causes. Those seasons are gone, but the next ones are not, and that is why this channel exists. Every week I put out content built entirely around giving you accurate, specific, practical information. Not photographs of perfect tomatoes in a catalog. Honest information about what actually works in a real garden with real constraints and a real budget. If you are watching right now and you are not yet subscribed, I want you to stop and press that button because it is free. And the information you just heard in the last several minutes, the information that would have saved some of those seasons, that is what you are going to miss if you do not. Hit subscribe. And if you know a gardener who has watched their tomatoes fail summer after summer without understanding why, send this video to them right now. A single link could change the next 5 years of their garden. Do that while it is on your mind. Mistake number 4, planting near black walnut trees or ignoring allelopathic soil. This is the mistake I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the one that most gardeners never identify correctly. The one that looks like a disease, gets treated like a disease, and is not a disease at all. And the reason it catches people so completely off guard is that the cause is invisible, it comes from outside the garden bed, and by the time the symptoms appear, there is nothing that can be done. Let me give you the full picture. Black walnut trees, Juglans nigra, are native to much of the eastern United States and are hardy across USDA zones 4 through 9. They are large, beautiful, long-lived trees, and millions of American properties either have one or are adjacent to a property that does. And they produce a chemical compound called juglone, technically 5-hydroxy-1,4-naphthaquinone, a naturally occurring herbicidal toxin that is released from every part of the tree, the roots, the leaves, the nut hulls, the decomposing wood. Every part of a black walnut tree produces juglone and it leaches continuously into the surrounding soil. The toxic zone around a mature black walnut extends roughly 1.5 times the height of the tree in every direction. A 60-foot tree can contaminate soil 90 feet from its trunk, and juglone persists in that soil even after the tree has been cut down and removed. Depending on soil conditions, that persistence can last anywhere from 1 year to several years after the tree is gone. Tomatoes are among the most sensitive plants in existence to juglone. The condition is called walnut wilt, and it does not present the way most plant diseases do. There is no gradual yellowing, no slow decline. What you see is a plant that appears to be growing normally, that looked healthy yesterday, and then wilts suddenly and completely. Within days of symptoms appearing, the plant collapses, and it does not respond to watering because water is not the problem. Juglone interferes with cellular respiration inside the tomato, its ability to use oxygen at the cellular level. The plant essentially suffocates from the inside out. The soil moisture is fine. The roots are structurally intact. The plant just dies, and if you do not know about juglone, you will spend a week trying to diagnose a fungal disease or a water problem that does not exist. You will treat for the wrong thing. And there is nothing that treatment is going to fix because the cause is the tree 40 feet away. If you have a black walnut on your property or on a neighboring property, map the canopy spread and extend your buffer by an additional 20 to 30 feet beyond the edge of that canopy. Do not plant tomatoes anywhere within that zone. Do not plant peppers, eggplant, or potatoes there either. All members of the nightshade family are highly sensitive to juglone. If you want to garden in that zone, build raised beds with a physical barrier between the imported soil and the native ground below, and understand that even that solution is imperfect if the tree's roots grow into the bed over time. The only genuinely safe approach is distance. Get outside that zone. In soil that previously sat under a black walnut that has since been removed, do not plant tomatoes or other sensitive crops for at least 2 years, and test for juglone sensitivity first by trying a juglone-tolerant plant like squash or beans to gauge whether the soil is safe before you invest in a full tomato planting. Now, black walnut is the most dramatic version of this problem, but it is not the only one. Allelopathy, the suppression of one plant by the chemical output of another, is more common in the garden than most people realize. Fennel is the one that catches vegetable gardeners most often. It is a beautiful, fragrant herb, and many gardeners plant it somewhere in or near the vegetable bed without realizing that it produces root exudates that are harmful to a wide range of vegetables, including tomatoes, peppers, and most brassicas. Keep fennel completely out of your vegetable garden. Grow it in a separate container or in its own isolated bed far from your food crops. Sunflowers, similarly, produce allelopathic compounds from their roots and decomposing plant material that can suppress the germination and growth of neighboring plants. If you are growing sunflowers as a companion or a border plant near your tomatoes, keep them at a genuine distance, at least 6 to 8 feet, and do not till decomposing sunflower material into a bed you plan to use for tomatoes the following season. Mistake number 5. Installing support too late or using the wrong support for the variety. This mistake sounds like a logistical detail. It sounds like the kind of thing you can handle next weekend once the plants are bigger and you can see how they are going to grow. That reasoning is exactly how it becomes a mistake every single year. People put tomato transplants in the ground in May, tell themselves they will set up the stakes or the cages when they have a free afternoon, and come back 3 weeks later to find their plants have sprawled sideways, stems have snapped under their own weight, and the fruit clusters they were waiting for are hanging 6 inches off the ground, directly in the path of slugs, earwigs, and every soil-borne pathogen in the garden bed. By then, the damage is already done, and most of it is not recoverable. Let me explain what actually happens when a tomato plant sprawls, because this is not just an aesthetic problem. Indeterminate tomato plants grow fast. A healthy transplant set in warm soil in late May will add significant height every week through June and July. The stems that look manageable and upright this week will be carrying the combined weight of dense foliage and multiple developing fruit clusters within 2 to 3 weeks. Tomato stems are not rigid. They are semi-succulent, relatively flexible structures that were not designed by nature to support that combined weight without external help. Under load, they bow outward, fruit clusters descend toward the soil, and eventually stems snap. A snapped stem on a tomato plant is a finished branch. Whatever fruit was developing on it is lost or severely compromised. When foliage and fruit come to rest on the soil, you have created the ideal conditions for every soil-borne pathogen in your garden. Fruit resting on damp ground rots quickly. Foliage pressed against the soil stays permanently wet and becomes a direct infection site for gray mold and blight. Insects find elevated supported fruit far more difficult to access than fruit lying on the ground. The damage compounds rapidly and quietly. The rule is this, and it is not negotiable. Install your support at the time of planting, not the next weekend, not when the plant gets bigger. At the time of planting. When the soil is still loose and easy to work, before the root system has expanded outward through the area where you will be driving stakes or anchoring cage legs. Installing support into soil next to an established tomato plant means driving metal or wood through an area where the root system has already spread. That root damage stresses the plant at a critical point in its development and can directly disrupt the consistent water and nutrient uptake that we discussed at length in the first 2 mistakes. Now let us be specific about which support is actually appropriate for which variety, because this is another area where the information most gardeners receive is badly incomplete. The standard conical wire cage sold at every garden center, the 3 or 4 ring structure that stands 30 to 36 inches tall, is appropriate for smaller determinate varieties. Patio zones 4 through 9, which stays under 3 feet, Bush Early Girl zones 4 through 9, Roma VF zones 5 through 10. These plants can be managed adequately in a standard cage. But if you buy one of those cages and put it around a Brandywine, a mortgaged lifter, or a San Marzano, all of which are large indeterminate plants that can reach 5 to 7 feet with fruit loads that put enormous leverage on, whatever is holding them upright, you will watch that cage tip over in August. The plant will come down with it. Everything the cage was supporting will come down with it. For large indeterminate varieties, you have 2 reliable options. The first is a heavy gauge wire cylinder built from a section of 16 gauge concrete reinforcing wire with 6-inch square mesh. Cut a section roughly 5 feet tall, form it into a cylinder about 18 to 20 inches in diameter, and stake it firmly to the ground with rebar driven through the mesh. That structure will support the heaviest indeterminate plant at full fruit load without moving. It lasts for decades and costs a fraction of replacing flimsy cages every few years. The second option is a single sturdy stake, a 6-foot hardwood stake driven at least 12 inches into the ground at planting time, within a few inches of the transplant. Use soft cotton twine or silicone tomato clips to loosely secure the main stem every 8 to 12 inches as the plant grows. Never use wire or stiff plastic ties directly against the stem. As the stem thickens through the season, a tie that was loose at installation becomes constricting. It will cut into the vascular tissue and reduce the flow of sugars from the leaves to the developing fruit on every branch above the constriction point. Always tie loosely enough that you could slide a finger between the tie and the stem, and check every tie weekly through the growing season. For specific variety sizes to guide your support planning. Cherokee Purple and Brandywine, both zones 5 through 8 will reach 5 to 7 feet and need the heaviest support you have. Sweet 100 zones 3 through 10 will reach 6 feet or more on a good season and needs a tall, sturdy structure from day one. Mortgage Lifters zones 5 through 9 was developed by a home gardener who crossed 4 of the largest commercial varieties he could find, and it will grow to 6 feet with individual fruit regularly exceeding 1 pound. That plant needs serious support installed on the day it goes into the ground. And if you put it in a standard garden center cone cage, you will spend a morning in August trying to prop up a collapsed 5-foot plant that has taken half its fruit down with it. Whatever support system you choose, the principle is identical. Install it early. Match it to the mature size of the variety you are actually growing, not to the size of the transplant in front of you right now. And revisit your ties or training points every single week as the plant grows. A tomato that grows up through or alongside its support naturally from the beginning builds around that structure organically. A tomato that sprawled for 3 weeks and then got caged in a panic has already snapped stems, already developed disease pressure from soil contact, and no amount of support after the fact fully undoes the damage that accumulated during those 3 unsupported weeks. Let me close with this. Every single mistake I walked you through today comes down to the same underlying problem: gardeners not having the specific information they needed before the damage happened. Not because they were careless, not because they were bad gardeners, because the information they were given was incomplete, or it was wrong, or it was designed to sell them a product rather than solve a problem. That is what this channel is here to change. Every week, content built around one goal: helping real American gardeners grow real food in real yards with real constraints and a real budget. No sponsored products, no vague encouragement, the specific variety names, the zones, the biology, the practical fixes that actually change the outcome of your season. If you have not subscribed yet after everything you just heard, I want you to press that button right now. It is free, it is here every week. And next week, I am covering the specific pruning and training techniques for indeterminate tomatoes that will double the quality of your fruit without adding more than 10 minutes of work per week to your season. If you are not subscribed, there is a real chance that video does not find you. Hit subscribe, drop your state or your zone in the comments right now. I read every single one. And go check that soil temperature before you plant anything.